Welcome, everyone, and I'd like to say hello and welcome you to the 2017 Spring Webinar Series hosted by the Illinois Farmers Market Association and the University of Illinois Extension. My name is Lori George, and I'm the Extension Educator specializing in small farms, local foods in Mount Vernon, Illinois. We appreciate you joining us for these webinars, and we will do our best to begin and end within the space of the hour. Participants have been muted for the presentation, but should you have any questions during the talk, please enter them into the text box at the left. I will do my best to make sure our presenter answers them as time allows. The presentation will be recorded, and I will email a link to the archived presentation as soon as possible after this concludes. Today, we do have Rebecca Osland from the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. Rebecca is a policy associate where she works to align legislative and administrative policies with grassroots visions of sustainable agriculture and local food systems. Prior to joining ISA's staff, she worked as a solo attorney advising local foods businesses and organizations and giving presentations on farm legal issues. Rebecca completed a BA in political science at the University of Chicago, followed by an LL.M. in tax law and a JD at Northwestern University. She also gardens at home and in a community garden, and has worked part-time on an organic vegetable farm and periodically helps a local family process their free-range chickens. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who joined the webinar today. I'm excited to give some updates. Illinois Stewardship Alliance has been working on farmers market and cottage food issues for a number of years now, so I'll be happy to share with you some exciting progress that we're making this year as well, but first we'll get into some of the changes that have already been made and update you on food sampling certification. So we can go ahead to the next slide and talk about the agenda. So we'll start out by giving a little bit of background on how these sampling certification rules came to be. I think it helps to orient things, to show how progress is made. Then we'll get into what your options are and how you go about getting certified. Followed by that, we'll talk about who actually needs that certification and additional details that are helpful to know. And then we'll wrap up with a policy update with some of the bills that Illinois Stewardship Alliance is working on this year, which I think are really exciting, so I'm excited to get to that part. And we'll follow with some questions if anyone has any questions at the end. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So this sampling certification, the rules trace back to a law that was passed in 2014 that we called the Smarter Rules for Farmers Markets legislation, and I shared the citation here if you had any interest in taking a look at it. I think it's good for people to have some familiarity with how these laws actually look. And this one is not too daunting, so you can look at Section 3.4 is the farmers market section. Section 4 is the cottage food section. So it's a good thing to look at to familiarize yourself with if you're in this field in particular. So the goal of this legislation was to create statewide consistency in several areas of farmers market regulation. Unfortunately, the only one that we really have had implemented at this point is the sampling certification, but that has been very helpful. Last year it was already in place, so we've seen that 1 year of people being able to utilize it. There was also supposed to be statewide consistency in rules about refrigeration and some other issues that really varied from county to county. The fees for some of these things, like sampling and permits for other things, really dramatically varied, and they tended to be for short durations, so that people had to recertify, for example, if they did a winter market. So that was getting hit twice in 1 year with fees, and that was on a county-by-county basis. So if somebody were to sell in multiple markets, in different counties, they would have fees accumulating in those various geographies as well. So that's a little bit of why we launched into this effort in 2014. July 2015 is when the regulations became effective. So like I said, last year was really the year that we saw this being used for the first time. And it is administered by the Illinois Department of Public Health. I'll give you contact information for them at the end here, but that's good to keep in mind that they are the body that oversees this new statewide certification. So we can go to the next slide, please. So why does this matter? Why have we invested time and effort into this? The benefits of sampling, there's estimates that by providing samples, the vendors are able to increase their sales by an estimated 30% on average. So that's a pretty significant boost. Obviously, if somebody can try something first, they know that they like it and they don't have to take the chance. And it gives the vendors a chance to start a conversation and develop relationships, which is a really important part of the farmers market. And just a quick note on that, some of the markets last year decided that they wanted to get market staff certified so that there would be a centralized sampling location at the market rather than each vendor having to get the certification. There's pros and cons to that. Like I said, relationship building is an important part of the sampling, so you do lose that, but at the same time it is convenient. So something to experiment with a little bit, perhaps, to see if that relationship building is important enough to just go ahead and get sampled individually. Get certified individually. So that is just to give a little more context on the increase in sales. And also, instead of having to go to each county, now this statewide certification means that you only need to get one certificate, and that certificate is valid for 3 years. So no longer is there this issue of multiple permits in multiple counties, and again, no more of this one summer certificate and one winter. It's good for a full 3 years. So that's a really great benefit of this new certificate. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Now, you still have options. You can continue to use the county certification if you choose. If you only sample at one market, and if that market is free or very minimal expense, then you might just want to go ahead and get that one county certification. And if you choose that option, you don't need to also get a state certificate. I believe there's only one county that's been offering free certification. So if you're in that one county, that might be the place where you still choose to go this route. Otherwise, in most counties, it's going to make more sense to go ahead and get the statewide permit. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, so if you do get the statewide permit, now we come into another two options. If you already have a valid Food Service Sanitation Manager certificate, then it's a simplified process. They believe you've already learned everything you need to learn, and it's actually above and beyond the training required for the sampling certificate. So if that's the case, then all you need to do is fill out the application and send them $10. So $10 for 3 years. That's really a minimal burden. The people who are going to have Food Service Sanitation Manager certificates are going to be cottage food businesses. That is a requirement for every cottage food operation, that the people involved must have the FSSMC. So this is just an easy way for those folks to add on this sampling permission. But if you do not already have that certificate, that's okay. You don't have to get it for sampling, but you do have to complete 2 trainings. One is through IDPH, which is the Illinois Department of Public Health. They offer a free farmers market food sampling handler training and I will provide the link for that on the next page. But so that's through IDPH, and then there's also a third-party certification that must be completed. That's an approved food handler course, and I'll provide an example of one of those as well. So those two trainings, and then you also must complete the IDPH application, and then the fee is $40. So a little bit different. I'm not sure why the additional fee if you don't have that certification, but perhaps they feel they have to inspect a little bit more, so it's a little more of their time. So those are your two options, and we'll get into where to find them on the next slide if you want to go ahead. Okay, so this i.train.org is the IDPH internal training resource, but it's also available to the public. So this is where they have provided the course, and I shared the course number here. It's 1061218. You can also search by keyword, but if you have the course number, that's a little quicker. And again, if you already have your Food Service Sanitation Manager certificate, you do not need to do the training on this web page, but you do need to go there in order to find the application. So that's going to be important to know this page no matter what. There's a food handler training course at the website that I shared here, illinois.foodhandlerclasses.com, and there is a $7 fee for that. So your total cost, if you don't have your Food Service Sanitation Manager certificate, is going to be $47 between the application fee and this training. So go ahead and jot that down, or we will send it out so you'll be able to get have the resource in front of you later as well. So this is a little bit small, but hopefully you can kind of make out what's on this page. This is the landing page when you go get to the training. It's going to give you a short course description. There's a couple of handouts that are helpful, providing safety overviews, and there's a checklist for when you get to the market to make sure you've got all of your equipment for sanitation. And this is also where you will find a link for the application. So that should be fairly straightforward. This is also, you'll use this page to click into the actual training as well, and you'll get a certificate at the end. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So here's what the actual application looks like. I just shared the top part of it here. What some people have run into trouble on is that they've missed some of the lines, and that then ends up getting returned to them. So in particular, this child support declaration, that cannot be skipped. You must answer yes or no to this question. So if you have vendors filling this out, or if you are a vendor, just be really careful to go through and make sure you're not missing anything. It's only the one page, but it's worth being really careful and thoroughly reviewing it. And these two boxes on the page are those two situations, whether or not you have the Food Service Sanitation Manager certification already. So you're either in one box or the other box, and you'll want to make sure you have all those pieces completed. So go ahead to the next slide, please. And here is the home page for that food handler training. Again, this one is not administered by IDPH, but it is required. So this is the one that will cost $7. If anyone has problems with not being able to do this online, I would say reach out to IDPH and let them know. And it's possible that they could put together some in-person trainings to use in lieu of this online training. So if that is an issue, don't give up. Just please reach out to IDPH. Otherwise, you'll be able to complete the whole thing here and get your certification online. All right, so that's the choices, and that's the process and the resources that you'll need. That's it. So we'll go on to who needs to get certified. So it is on an individual basis. not the business as a whole. So this is a little bit of a burden if you have multiple people who rotate at the market. Each individual who provides samples needs this certification. So that could add up for the business, and it could just be a little bit of a hassle, which is why some of the markets have offered market staff sampling, which, again, it's an individual basis, weighing those pros and cons of the convenience versus really emphasizing that personal relationship direct between vendor and customer. But maybe both, you could try both. And it is quite broad which individuals need to get the certification. It actually says if anyone unpacks, cuts, slices, prepares, or distributes food, they need the certification. So something like unpacks is pretty broad. But this is, my understanding is if the samples are pre-packaged and you're just taking packaged foods packaged samples out of a box, say that, I don't believe that counts. But pretty much anything that you're doing to actually prepare samples on the site requires the certification. And the certificates are non-transferable among individuals, really individual-based. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So if you are a cottage food business, you have two options. You can either prepare your samples ahead of time in the home kitchen that you have registered with your county, and as long as they're already packaged and ready to go, that's good enough. But if you're going to do any preparation, that is going to require any preparation on site. That's going to require you to have an additional food sampling certificate. So if you're not a cottage food business, you just have to get this sampling certification, period, because you won't have a home kitchen that's authorized for preparation. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of nuance on the duration of the certificates. If you don't possess a food safety sanitation manager certificate, your 3-year period begins at your completion of IDPH's food sampling handler training. So that portal that we looked at from IDPH for training, that's the one that's going to count. So if you wanted to complete the other parts first and then do that last, it'll give you a little bit extra time. If you do have that certification, your sampling certificate will be valid for 3 years following the issuance of the sampling certificate. So that puts the date out just a little bit ahead of where you would start with the if you didn't have the FSSMC, and that's just because that's the only recordable date that they'll have for you. So just a slight nuance, and we can go to the next slide. Okay, a little bit more additional details. So just basic food service sanitation, and this is covered in some of those additional documents that are on the IDPH portal. So this is something you'll be able to find there as well. But just to note, hand washing stations and proper dishwashing facilities must be available. So there will be, we're working on some legislation now about hand washing stations, but just note that if you are producing samples on site, you're probably going to want to have your own hand washing station at your booth so that you can really be conscientious and making sure that everything is sanitary. Cold and hot holding requirements apply to samples too. So if you have cold foods, you'll want to make sure that they're staying below 41 degrees, and then the equivalent for the hot foods. And you also still have to comply with all of the state and county production and sales requirements. So this isn't in lieu of other certification. This is merely to cover the act of sampling. and you'll want to be careful about contamination, so keep your samples covered, and don't provide any communal dishes that people would be reaching into or scooping out of. Each sample has to be packaged in its own individual packaging. So a little bit wasteful perhaps with garbage, but it's for food safety concerns that they don't want people touching foods that other people will eat. So go ahead to the next slide, please. Here's a few examples of what IDPH does not want to see. So you've got things like bags that people would reach into and grab one of several items. You've got dips, and you've got little containers, but there's several pieces, and so again, that just falls into that same, you might touch something that somebody else would eat. So all of these we do not want to see, but on the next slide we have some examples of proper sampling. So if you have bigger pieces that you can cut up and put toothpicks in, that works. Individual cups, or little dishes with individual utensils. So these are examples of what we do want to see. They're not covered right now, but that's because they're being offered at the moment. I asked IDPH about that. They said, well, while you're offering it, it's okay. You can have it uncovered. So this is what to look for, and we can go ahead to the next slide. Here is the certificate that you'll get once you've completed all the requirements and sent in your application and your fee. This does need to be displayed at the point of sale. IDPH inspectors or the local health inspectors will be looking for it. So market managers can help vendors by making sure that there's reminders that this certificate should be displayed. We can go to the next slide, please. So that's the overview of sampling, and we are now going to quickly talk about the policy updates for 2017. Illinois Stewardship Alliance is working on 4 bills. 2 of them deal with cottage food and farmers markets. And like I said earlier, there were regulations that we were watching for that would have helped clarify or create some statewide consistency with respect to refrigeration and some other issues that were just really dramatically different from county to county. And that was worked on by the Farmers Market Task Force for a few years, but because the legislation that passed in 2014, the point of that was to create this statewide consistency. So 2014, we're now in 2017, and those rules have still not been implemented. And in fact, the work that was done, IDPH decided was kind of going a different direction than they thought made sense, so they wanted to scrap those rules and start all over again. And that would put us out at least till next year, if not the following year. Because of that timeline, we said, well, we'd like to bring some of these issues that we've already agreed upon to the legislature. So instead of waiting for rules, what we did is we took one bill and put the refrigeration and hand washing issues into that bill, and then the other bill deals with cottage food. So the first one, the local food business opportunities, we started it in the Senate and the House. It passed both, so now we just have to consolidate one into the other, and then they will be on their way to it will be on its way to the governor. So that's really exciting. It could become law sometime this summer, hopefully in time for it to help people during this market season. But once it does finally leave the legislature completely, they have 30 days to send it to the governor, and then he has 60 days to sign it. So we still could be looking at a few months out, but hopefully they will move a little bit quicker with it. This bill would allow vendors in every county to choose what kind of cooling system that they want to use at the market. So some counties right now allow coolers with ice, other counties mandate mechanical refrigeration, and some even say it has to be a refrigerator that's on this approved list of models. So pretty extreme differences from county to county. One county last year said that there was a permitting fee for bringing a refrigerator, and the vendor said, well, that's my entire expected profit for selling eggs this summer, so she decided not to sell eggs. So we really don't want to see that happening. And this bill would give vendors everywhere the choice of what kind of equipment they want to use, and also says that the counties cannot charge a permitting fee. And the other issue that the bill deals with is saying that vendors can share hand washing stations as long as they're reasonably accessible. So some counties have allowed that already. Others have said, no, each and every vendor must have a hand washing station. If you're not doing sampling, there's really a much reduced need to have hand washing facilities immediately accessible. But just note that the regulators will want to make sure that it's feasible to get to the hand washing station. So vendors that are there by themselves and the hand washing station is way on the other side of the market, that may not be seen as acceptable. It may not be seen as reasonably accessible because that vendor isn't going to be able to get away from the booth and run over there if they're really busy. So there's some practicality to it, and it may vary a little bit depending on the actual circumstances of the vendor, but this will at least move us towards a little bit less inefficiency in making everybody do this. And then the other bill that we're working on, we've called the Illinois Food Freedom Act. This one also, it passed the House at the beginning of April, actually unanimously, and now it's assigned to the Senate Public Health Committee, which is meeting tomorrow afternoon. This one flips the cottage food paradigm. So currently the cottage food law says nothing is allowed to be homemade and sold other than these few items. What this bill says is everything is allowed to be homemade and sold except for some items that are more potentially hazardous. So those we will actually talk about in just a moment, but this one was really exciting. We based it on the Wyoming Food Freedom Act, and we thought, well, this is probably not going to go anywhere because it's too crazy. The Wyoming law basically says you can sell any kind of food to an informed end user. It's not restricted to farmers markets, and it includes meats other than, it includes some meats. So that was a lot, and dairy, so a lot further than Illinois was probably going to go. And in fact, we did sit down with the public health interests, and we talked about it, and we decided, well, yes, it does make sense to flip the paradigm, but there are some foods that we're just not quite comfortable including yet. And the other big change that bill will make is that it scratches out a cap on gross revenues. So there will no longer be a limitation on how much money you can earn from a cottage food business. Currently that cap is $36,000, and it's gross revenue, so that's not even deducting expenses, which some vendors have told me expenses can be about up to 2/3. So at that point, you're looking at only being able to earn actually $12,000 a year from a cottage food business, which is really not much. So instead of just increasing that number, we were able to eliminate it completely. Cottage food will still have to be sold just at a farmer's market unless it is unless the food contains a signature ingredient that was grown on the farm, and then it can be sold from a farm stand or through the farm's CSA. So if you are a farmer raising some of the food that you're putting into the cottage food, you have a little bit more flexibility on venue, but everybody else still needs to sell at the farmer's market. And with this bill, we had one vegetable farmer tell us that after this becomes law, she'll basically no longer have any food waste on her farm. So it's a really big deal, and we're really excited to be able to help in that way. So again, neither of these are law yet, but they are moving along and look quite promising. So hopefully sometime this summer we'll have both become law, and will help some more folks. So we can go ahead to the next slide, and I'll share what some of the foods are that will still not be allowed to be included in cottage food. So it's a little bit small, but hopefully you can see foods that contain meat, poultry, dairy, eggs, with some exceptions. Those will not be allowed. Garlic in oil because of a botulism risk. And then things like cut tomato and melon are actually considered potentially hazardous foods. We just learned that, but we did negotiate to be able to get some exceptions so that people could do blanched and frozen, just frozen, cut and frozen tomatoes. Acidified canned vegetables would be allowed, but they were not comfortable with canned foods just as a blanket category because of, again, the risk of botulism. So it would have to be things that are acidified, like pickles, fermented vegetables, just to cut down on that risk of bacteria formation. So this is a list to start taking a look at, but this really moves us quite far in opening up a lot more options for our homemade food businesses. So we moved through all of that quite quickly, but I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time if there were questions. This last slide here shares the contact information for IDPH as well as my contact information. So we can open it up for questions, and you can use these this contact info if you think of things later.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. For those that are on the line, if you do not have the chat box open, if you look in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a white bubble with 2 lines in it. If you click on that, it will open the chat box. I will open the speakers to our guests that are here today if they want to ask any questions, so feel free to ask questions at this time. Okay, so if we have anybody that's typing, go ahead and type. But I would like to thank Rebecca, our presenter, Rebecca, for the fabulous information that she gave us today. I'm really excited about those new policy updates that are planning on coming in. I know that you guys have been really working on that for quite a while, so on behalf of everybody, thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been really exciting to see what reception we have with the legislature.
Yep. Yep. Okay. All right. So we'll see. Go ahead.
All of the bills passed with huge support. The local food business opportunities, I think we had 2 no's in the House, but everything else has been very, very positive, and it was unanimous in the Senate.
Good. All right, I know that when they become laws, then all you have to do is look on the Illinois Stewardship Alliance website, and they will go ahead and get some information there, as well as the Illinois Farmers Market Association. We will do updates on our websites as well, and some additional University of Illinois Extension websites will also keep track of all that as well. I don't have any questions at this time. I would like to thank everybody for joining us for this webinar. I hope you got some information out of it that will help you to promote and develop your market for this season, as well as your business. I will send an email out with a link to the archived webinar that you've just watched. We are also going to send out a link for a small evaluation, if you would. We do look at the feedback and we use it to shape our future webinars, so please take the time to fill it out and let us know what you're looking for. Without any further questions, I wish you a fabulous rest of the day and a successful growing season in 2017. Thank you for joining us today.